This week on A to Z Running, what's going on in the biosensor industry? Well, we kick off a multi-week series to address the technology and what it does and can do for runners. Is it a good thing for the sport? We'll find out. In running news, Boston Marathon champ Des Linden is getting a new heart. What's that all about? And also, according to Runner's World, breathing matters, but we're probably doing it wrong, apparently. And it's about time to discuss cross country as we begin to enter championship season. All this and more coming up on A to Z Running. Welcome back to A to Z Running, where we're helping runners thrive with information, inspiration, coaching, and training services. I'm Zach. Just a reminder that you can learn more about our services and supports for runners at AtoZrunning.com. And be sure to follow us on Instagram, YouTube, and Spotify, among the other places. So it's just me again today, as you can see. And no, you don't need to groan so loudly, but Andy will be back soon. I've been promising that because it is true. I guess soon is relative. What soon means, I don't know what soon means. She'll be back at least in a couple weeks at most. that didn't make a lot of sense. But let's move on. So we've been doing a lot on social media lately, and you've probably noticed, and you're probably thinking, what is going on here? So I wanted to take a minute to tell you about it now, retroactively, about what all that was going on. First question you may have, is Zach suddenly running professionally for Under Armour? And the answer, of course, is no, which would be wonderful, but no. I had, in fact, a great opportunity to perform one event for Under Armour, but it was just for that event. So quick just shout out, some major thanks to Will Lear for making it happen. He connected me with all of this as a part of, he was directing this initiative with Under Armour that they were doing. And so many thanks, Will, for all the details and taking care of all that stuff. And then, for allowing me to be a part of it. That was awesome. Also to the Under Armour Mission Run Baltimore Distance team, their pro running team, for hosting and helping so graciously with the whole thing. There's a lot that they did as well, and that was great. And many, many other people. And I could name all the names. It would take a while. So here's what we did. Under Armour brought myself and a woman runner to Baltimore for the Baltimore Running Festival Marathon. Baltimore, why Baltimore? Because it's the site of Under Armour World Headquarters, which is very cool. More on that in a moment. And why in particularly this type of thing? Well, it's basically that they are trying to use this opportunity, one, to rep the brand well on home soil, and two, to feature some of the new things they're doing, including their super shoes, which are new on the scene relative to some of the others that are more familiar to people. So being on home turf, they wanted to not just have a presence, but they wanted to have a big presence, and the goal was, let's win the races. And they went all in. And how cool was this? They pampered us, fed us, did all the stuff, took us to the race course and drove around, which took forever. Thanks, Will and Corey, for all of that, and Kate, who was with us too. And so that was, that was certainly just a lot going on, and they managed all those details and treated us well. It was awesome. We got to hang out with the pro team for a bit on one of the days and do a little short shakeout run together. We got to tour the world headquarters for Under Armour, which is very cool. It would be very much fun to work in a place like that, I would imagine. So all very interesting. Got to see a Korean War, or is it just Korean? A Korean ship of war that was docked right at Under Armour headquarters. That's where it was, and it was departing that day when we were there. So we actually got to see the ship depart, and with all the fanfare. It was very cool. It was very cool. And that entirely unattached from the experience. It just happened to be coinciding with when we were there. How fun was that? Now, more than all of that was race day support, which was really something. So this included pacers. I had Willie Fink and Adam Fogg, part of the Mission Run Baltimore Distance team, pacing me. These guys are like middle distance specialists, 1500 kind of range track specialists. And so they came out there and in cold rain as well to help out, which was awesome. Support crew on the bike as well. Will Lear himself was riding the entire race. in the rain. It wasn't raining the whole entire time, but it was raining enough of the time. And so that must have been miserable. Not only that, Will, throughout the race, kept offering me his gloves. I didn't have any gloves on. And it was, it wasn't cold, but it was cold enough. It was like 50 degrees, cold enough for that when it's raining. That's not great. So Will keeps offering me his gloves during the race. I'm like, no, it's fine. It really wasn't that. My hands did not feel that bad. They were cold, but it wasn't like, causing me problems that I could notice. But Will was riding a bike, which means if he would have given me his gloves, how much worse would that have been for him? How cold that would have been. And never once did he say anything like that, which is, what a guy. He also put his own hat and jacket on me after the race when I was just standing there shivering like seconds after I finished. Just really incredible stuff being taken care of so well by the group there. How cool. So I should note then, how did it go? Well, I have to say the Baltimore Marathon was not my finest moment for marathoning. In fact, it was very nearly the least finest moment I've had in a marathon. As far as the outcome, at least, the experience was by far the most incredible. The outcome, as far as my own efforts. But we still achieved objective number 1, winning the race. And so not only did we win both the men's and the women's races, so Emily Royston won the women's race, and then I won the men's race. But the men also swept the race in the podium positions, which is just incredible. So just really a great showing. And all of that, can't thank Under Armour enough for such a cool experience. So that's why, if you saw on our social media, there's a whole lot of posting, and it had something to do with this event, and Zach was doing a lot of things with Under Armour. That's why, and that's what happened. And it was very cool. And now we're kind of back to the grindstone and getting ready for the next thing. So enough about me. Let's get started with your questions. If perchance we have time some other time, I may talk more about the actual race itself and how it went down, because it was an interesting one. But again, enough about me. Let's get to our question today. This one is a question from Kelsey, and it's a multi-layered experience here, so we're just going to probably have time for one question this time around. But I did want to address this one because it's a very important question. So in Kelsey's situation, this is I'm just getting started in the sport of running type of thing, kind of scenario. And it's important to think about this, whether we're just getting started ourselves or certainly we talk a lot about people who have been in the sport for a long time. But what about these early stages? Coming back from any kind of major disruption, but especially first-timers. So Kelsey's situation here, just to kind of summarize her note to us, her longest run has been 39 minutes, I think ever is what she meant by that. And usually she runs once or twice a week. I think one time she ran 3 times in 1 week. She does have a history of athletics, but not running, swimming specifically, which is awesome. Nice work. And delivered a baby about 15 months ago. And that was the 4th in 5 years. Holy smokes. So, yeah, that does matter. That does matter, Kelsey. So then her question, where do I start? She's got a general understanding of things, but she needs to know what this would look like. So, okay, a few things. First, actually, as it were, at the Baltimore Marathon when I was there, after the race, doing an interview with the local news, and one of the news anchors asked me specifically about how this is kind of hard. Like, how do people do this? It's kind of hard. Essentially, how do people get started? And so I in a moment like this, you don't give a complex response like I'm doing right now. You give like a 10-second answer to the question. But this was basically my answer. Everyone has to start where they are at, what they can handle, and then build a little at a time with as much consistency as possible. That's the key. Consistency and building gradually over time. And as you do, it gets easier, it gets better, and it gets funner or more fun. And I think the response from the lady was essentially, I don't know that I believe you. Don't believe you that it gets easier. This thing can't be easy. Well, it actually can be. That's the point. It can be easy. And it can be easy for anyone. That's not to suggest anyone can run Eliud Kipchoge fastness and it's easy. That's not true. I don't know very many humans on the planet who can do that. But it certainly can be easy in general. And so this is kind of where we go. Kelsey, here's our thoughts. The first thing as you begin building things up, as you begin starting, is you need to start adding days. That's the first step. And the reason why you add days first is because you're trying to add frequency of stress to the system before you do anything else. And you don't add too many all at once. If you've been doing 1 or 2 per week, then you need to add 3 per week. You need to do that consistently for a short time. And when you can do that consistently and handle it well, then you add 4. Here's the rule. Now, first, you only need to do as many days as you can handle. Like if your life says I can't run more than 4 days in 1 week, then that's where you're going to stop. But the goal in general with running is, if we want this thing to be something we can build upon, then to establish a firm enough foundation, we at least need to be running more than 50% of the time. So our rule of thumb is every other day minimum is the general goal for runners to begin to build a foundation. Now, that is not scientific because it does depend on a number of other factors, but that's an easy guideline that we can all understand and does, in fact, address the fundamental physiology of what we're trying to accomplish fairly well. So minimum of greater than 50% of the days in the week, which means every other day you end up running 4 days a week. Generally. So that's the starting point. And then we do encourage all runners to try to run 5 or 6 days a week if they're able, if their goal is performance gains, because it is hard to make performance gains on only 4 days of running a week. And I say it that way. I know that that's not an only thing, but you need more to achieve more in general. But you stop where you can handle what your life can give you. So how long does it take to add those days? Well, that depends on, well, I guess I'll get to this with the next layer too, but all building of things depends on how you're handling the current thing, the current load. So after you have built up to whatever the number of days per week you're running, and you don't need to be doing hardly anything. It's like 30 minutes of running in a day is great. If you can't handle 30 minutes of running in 4 days a week, then do 15 one day and 30 another day. The rule of volume of day to day is you go every other. 1 day is shorter, so the next time you run is longer. The next time you run shorter again. You just go every other. And the principle of the long run, like the weekend long run, you don't need to address at this stage of things. You do not need to try to have this one longer long run yet. You get to that later on when you're more developed and ready for it. So right now you just do 1 day that's shorter, 1 day that's longer, and it's nice to have a rule of kind of like the make it substantially different enough that it's a notable physiological stimulus difference. So go back and forth, do that until you're up to the number of days in the week you can handle, and then you start adding total volume. And this is where you get into a whole realm of like schools of thought and theories. Most tend to use this principle of 10%, add 10% to your total volume every week and no more. But if you start doing the math there, it takes forever to grow. We're talking about like what, I add like 3 minutes or 5 minutes to my total volume. No, that's not really, in principle, that doesn't make a lot of sense much of the time. So instead, what you're trying to do is you're trying to add enough that increments that you can handle. And we like 5 or 10 minute increments in general. And it just kind of depends on how much you're running already. So without giving more specifics there, 5 or 10 minute increments are great. Sometimes you can do 15-minute increments if you are able. So how do you know if you're able? That's the piece here. And that the answer to that is that you need to build when you feel comfortable with the previous week's load of running. So meaning I did the week of running and I feel good about it. I'm not especially tired. I'm not majorly sore. If I am sore, it was like just fleeting for a moment, and that's at most. And if those things are not the case, then I do the same thing again. I repeat the week unless it's obvious that I am handling it comfortably. And so you do that until you can handle the week comfortably, and then you go up the next increment. Add 5 or 10 minutes to each of your runs, something like that. Okay, and so then as you gain in that sense, the underlying theme of effort is everything must be as easy as possible. The easiest effort that you can manage for this running. Because the more important thing is that you can add load and volume, but the limiting factor for almost every runner is that we're exerting too much. So we can't handle more load or volume because we're pushing too hard for the current load. Now, if that's the case, the only way you tend to know that is things like fatigue and soreness. And so if you have fatigue and soreness and you have to repeat a week, if that is something that kind of is thematic, like I'm definitely not feeling like I'm able to increase, I'm kind of hitting a block, you have a few options here because there are certainly changes you need to make. If you feel like, oh, this was way too much, I couldn't handle it this week, really burnt me out, I was very tired all the time, I was really sore, things like that. Okay, 3 layers of adjustment, and this is the way you look at it. First is you scale the effort back even more. Now, that's the assumption is you can. There comes a time when you can't really scale the effort back anymore because you're just doing as low an effort as is reasonable. But you scale the effort back even more first. If that's not solving the problem, or you don't think that you're going as easy as you reasonably could do, which chances are you could still go easier, by the way. That's true for almost everyone who runs. You can probably go easier. But let's say that you've reached the limit of that adjustment. Then you scale back the time across a few of the runs. And so grab a few, like 2 or 3 of them during the week and reduce the time a little bit. And then see if you can handle that load. Do that for another week and then increase it back again and see if you can handle the previous load you had tried before. So do that. And then after that, if that still doesn't address the problem or solve the problem, then you take a day off of the running that you already had planned. Just take it out of the schedule. So now, that's the case while you're building up. There's a different answer for those of you who are like, yeah, I've been doing this. I'm 10 weeks into a very strong cycle, and I'm feeling a little bit of extra fatigue. So are you telling me I should just scale back all my efforts, or are you telling me I should take a day out, like all that stuff? That's going to depend on the situation. But in this instance, when you're building things up, that's the order of priority. Now, the last thing to note here is don't do a couch to 5K plan. Don't look one of those up and follow it. I can't speak for every single plan out there. I have no doubt there are some that are just fine and probably mirror some of the same things I'm describing. It's not like I came up with these ideas myself. These are ideas that are out there in the world. But here's the reason why we don't do couch to 5K plans, because they're not built to scientifically, to physiologically maximize what you need to be doing to build your capacity as a runner. Instead, a couch to 5K plan is built around the premise of give them all the ingredients in like micro bits and little doses, and do all the stuff that you would find in a regular training plan, but do it in a smaller way or a littler way. And that doesn't make any sense. Makes no physiological sense. For the same reason why most of the just generic training plans you can Google out there just don't make any sense physiologically. So don't do that. Instead, do the thing we just said. Do the thing I just told you. Wow, that makes me sound quite arrogant. I'm not saying this arrogantly, but in principle, what you need is you need to build a musculoskeletal foundation, because you're never going to be able to do anything valuable with the rest of it if you don't have a strong structure. So we got to start there. Now, that's only just the running training side. We spent a substantial amount of time recently talking about neuromuscular development. This is a key area for early runners, new runners, someone who's new to the sport, someone who's new to athletic activity, any of those things at all. It's important for all of us. It's imperative if you're starting something or rebuilding something from nothing. And the reason why I say it that way is because you need your body to know how to move. That's the thing you're going to do, right? You're going to move a lot. You need it to know how to do that. And you need it to know how to do that as well as possible. So you have to start with some of the basics of how do I teach my body the right ways to move. And I can't go into all the details here. You want to go back and listen to those episodes. We've shared them just recently. And so find the neuromuscular ones. Neuromuscular training, neuromuscular development is going to be key. And if there's one resource I recommend constantly to help with that, it's look up Jay DeSherry's work. And specifically his book is called Running Rewired. It's an excellent read, and anyone of any level is going to benefit from that, whether you are running professionally from Under Armour or you're someone just starting off like Kelsey is as she's writing to us. All right, there you go, Kelsey. I hope that gets you started. There's a lot more that could be said, but I want to try to give you enough to set the framework for how we would do something like that, and let us know if you have follow-up questions as well. And for everyone else, if you want to ask your questions, we answer 1 or 2 questions every single week on the podcast, and we do that because we like talking more about what is on your mind than what is on our minds. And so you can do that. You can share your questions, and we'll answer them. Jump on the social media, certainly, if you've got a place there where you can comment on stuff and ask. But the easiest way is to go to atozrunning.com/question. Now, let's get on to something helpful. As promised in the introduction, we are going to spend a few weeks here addressing what is a very interesting topic for runners. Not just right now, but in general. And that is biosensors, or I guess I could say biosensing. That's the topic. Biosensors being something that most runners are using in some capacity without much practical deliberation. I'm not using it for certain reasons or trying to leverage it for certain reasons, and yet I am using it. And many of you are, by the way, being deliberate with it. But whether or not you're being deliberate with it, most of us do not necessarily know what all is actually out there in this realm that's available, as well as what the things are doing potentially that we're already using. And so we found this really interesting. We started talking to some people about this, and we're like, you know what? We need to spend some time covering this topic. And not only do we need to do that, but we need to bring you a number of assets to the conversation. Among them, some research, what is actually true about these technologies, and then as well, some people, the people who are actually in the field, who are doing the thing, doing the good work. And so we've got all of that here coming up in the next few episodes, and you're going to definitely want to tune into these as we break this down in what is going to be a really interesting series of reflections. So first up, I wanted to set the stage here. We have an interview coming up next week with a founder of one of these companies who's going to share from her experiences what's going on in this technology. But I want to set the stage with a very broad perspective on what's involved here and the application for runners, and give you a little bit of a sense of what may or may not be possible with these technologies. So here we go. First of all, biosensor. Let's define it. That's always a good place to start. What do you mean, Zach? What are you talking about? According to a 2016 research review by Mehrotra, which, by the way, I like research reviews because it's like, take all the stuff and then say, okay, what's some broad understandings about this, but also they're highly imprecise in the sense that they just tend to be very conceptual. And so that's why I started here. This is a good conceptualizer for us. In this review, the study defines biosensors, and it says biosensors are analytical devices that convert a biological response to an electrical signal. Simple and straightforward. Something happening biologically, turning into an electrical signal that we can then mine for data and do things with. Okay, so that's not bad. Now, that being the case, technologically speaking, these things have been around since at least since the 1960s, which is kind of crazy when you think about it. That stuff's been happening, but it hasn't been always applied to certain broader domains, and we'll talk about the applications here. These kinds of technologies include enzyme-based, which is often used in not things related to humans as well, cell-based, tissue-based, DNA-based, and more. So we'll get into that. We'll get into some of the and more there. So you can see that it covers like all the biological stuff, right? Essentially, and the physical and physiological stuff, and we'll get into that. But also some just wide ranges of uses, including detecting pathogens in food for like health and safety, monitoring blood sugar for diabetes patients, which may be familiar to many of us, detecting various types of diseases like cancers or infections, heart rate monitors, obviously, and so many more, which I will share. But the point here is this is happening across basically all domains of life. And it is happening in serious ways at serious levels in athletics. So the question is, if these technologies can monitor so many different types of things and give us potentially actionable data, what does this mean for runners? So let's get into it. Specifically, the category here that's important is wearable biosensors, because there's a lot of biosensors out there that you go somewhere and like plug into a machine, or you have a machine that you then do something and then set it down, right? So those things are highly developed, but they are not practical for something like active states. And so there's a lot to say about the wearable category of biosensors. So then I looked at this study. This is a 2019 study by Seshadri and others that states the emergence of flexible and stretchable electronics coupled with the ability to quantify biomechanical analytes and physiological parameters have enabled the detection of key markers indicative of performance and stress. So that's the key. You can read these data in such a way that tell you things about performance and stress. That's what the wearables are designed to do. You recall we answered a question about Whoop recently, which is a recovery system. And Whoop has uses biosensors in such a way to develop intuitive understandings of your levels of stress, physical and physiological stress, so that it can then recommend to you action. Which that's the goal of all the stuff, okay? And there's tons of this out there. You can monitor sweat. You can monitor brain activity. Of course, heart rate, we're all familiar with those, or many are familiar with those. You can monitor motion mechanics and stress levels, respiration rates, like all this kind of stuff is existing technologies today. I mean, to the point where, and like posture, has said motion mechanics, but even like posture is one of them. I remember finding this one. It's I can't remember what it's called, Fox or something, and it has basically like you wear the strap. It's like a chest strap, and it's going to tell you things about your left, right center of gravity. It's going to tell you things about your forward, backwards leaning and tilting, and all this kind of stuff. And then it gives you real-time suggestions. Now, I have long said that I don't think that technology has major practical application outside of in a well-developed approach. Like, that's not something that anyone can just put on and then have it say, you're leaning too far to the right, you need to straighten up or something. Chances are that's not going to help a person. And we've talked about this in the past. You don't very easily, and certainly not effectively, change motion mechanics while you're running. It's very hard to do that in an intuitive sense. You have to turn it into familiar, automatic type of motion, which we have gotten into at length previously, very recently. So here's the point then with all of this is like I looked at the list. They have tables and tables of examples of sensors and existing wearable biosensors and all the functionality. And we're talking about like dozens of them that are used currently today, which I found amazing because I knew that this stuff was out there. I did not realize how pervasive it is. So we're talking essentially what these things are doing. You can kind of subcategorize them in a fairly intuitive way. There's the physical stuff like movement and motion mechanics. There's the physiological stuff like heart rate, respiration, some of that type. And then there's the biomechanical side of things like sweat, like the chemical composition of your sweat, your blood sugar, all that kind of stuff. All right. So what they can do with that information is what is so interesting. And just a quick other note about how functionally what's going on here. Usually we're talking about something like a patch. You've got like patches that monitor sweat. There are patches with thin filaments that actually stab into you, and then they can monitor blood sugar, which, by the way, Kipchoge popularized one of those because he wore it during that sub 2-hour marathon stuff. And I think he actually had one with the Nike one too. But they, so in that instance, they were literally monitoring sweat and blood sugar compositions while he's running to try to essentially, to prime the best possible addressing hydration, nutrition types of things. So that's key. Lots of things with patches. Oh, there's another category here that I just found so interesting. They can monitor stress, right? Like how much stress are you under? And I'm not talking just about like hard effort and running, but all of the contributors to your current level of stress internally can be potentially monitored, which I find fascinating. So they believe they can use certain kinds of indicators like skin temperature, heart rate variability, changes in sweat gland activity. Like, seriously here, they have what apparently is a clear link between certain kinds of sweat gland activity and emotional states. Like, I know what emotional state you're in because of what your sweat glands are doing. Amazing and fascinating concepts here. We'll talk about the practicality. We'll talk about the effectiveness, efficacy. But I did want to mention too, there's another one that I found very fascinating, which is a mouth guard that can monitor saliva in such a way that then they generate understandings like of glucose levels and other types of things. So immediately I was like, oh, I wonder if they're using that in the NFL currently, which there's a good chance they are, because they actually referenced an NFL coach who specifically said, yeah, we've been doing these things for a long time. And they actually have specific data that are showing connections between the uses of certain monitoring protocols, biosensors that they're using, and the reduction in injuries because of the use of these things. I'm looking at this and I'm thinking, wow, that's incredible. But it's also been happening for a while. So why do we not see more of this in some senses? And what are the limitations and setbacks? So I want to share a brief reflection here before then essentially prefacing what's going to be how we're going to try to tackle this topic moving forward. So the first challenge, the first question with this stuff is, are these data consistent and are they reliable? Because, as you might guess, with something like heart rate monitors, for instance, we have ourselves cast a fair bit of shade on heart rate monitors because so much of the time there is a margin of error level that's statistically significant enough that is not practical. And so that you can say on one run, your heart rate was measuring a certain range, and then on another run, what should have been comparable in all senses, and yet it's measuring differently, can be true, because things that affect heart rate measurements include humidity, include what you're wearing apparel-wise, because it's going to influence some of the things that are happening, certainly on the surfaces that are surrounding the heart rate monitor, and other things. So there's confounding factors. Now, I certainly understand how it's possible that a number of those things only confound theoretically and in reality do not present a major obstacle to the technology. I know that can be the case, but I have my reservations. It's kind of that's the way I think about it at this point in time, because we know that the variability exists. So that is tricky. Do you go by a training plan? Do you not go purchase, but do you follow a training plan that uses heart rate as the guiding input? And so you watch your heart rate throughout the workout, and you only run within certain zones of heart rate for a given task, a given run. And of course, the answer to that is, well, that's actually not a bad way to train, because it is under the model of effort-based. It's using the same principles as only give the amount of effort that you need to gain what you should gain from the run. Now, that is the case, but heart rate is not the only key measure for overall stress and effort. And so then if you say, all right, well, that's not enough, that's too limited a view, what other things can we incorporate into this? And then you start looking at things like that, the sensors that measure overall stress levels. And then if you wear that patch and you've got skin temperature involved, and you've got a little bit more with heart rate variability monitored, which is even better than just heart rate, and some of these other things, now suddenly we're getting into a potential for, now I can see the full picture of how much stress I am under. And so then it's, emotional, mental, and physical stress are all present in the conversation and are all important to what I do as a runner. So is that what I should do? And if that's the case, should I have all of these things when I'm training always stay within a certain level and never exceed it for a given task in running? And if that's the case, as a runner, what am I doing? What's the implication here, right? Take the concept to its final assumption or its ultimate conclusion. And what we arrive at is a world where we plug enough things into ourselves, or wrap around and attach to ourselves enough things that we know all the stuff that's happening internally within external monitors. And if we can do that, then we don't make any decisions, right? That's the key here. We don't actually make any decisions. We just follow the recommendations of the technologies. And I will make the case that that is a very bad scenario for the sport and for the individual. I'm going to talk more about that as we unpack it, because that's not the only possible conclusion here. That's not the inevitable, guaranteed conclusion. So we want to keep that in mind. There's a bad end potentially, but what is the good end, and what does it look like, and how do we apply certain technologies most effectively here? And if I can say one thing more in previewing our conversation with Meredith Cass, who's the CEO of Nix Biosensors, if I can say one other thing, she will state far better than I will, but to kind of preview it, the key here is that these companies that are in this field have a charge, and that charge is to develop a technology that is effective, that has high levels of reliability, consistency, all of that, practicality as well. So it can't just give you a raw data scores about something. Can't just do that, because that's not enough to be highly effective. And she will get into that more. But also, it needs to be accessible. This stuff has to be cost effective enough that anyone can buy it. And that's one of the major obstacles with technologies like this today. And so it's a fascinating, we're going to talk with Meredith more about it. You can look forward to that in the next couple of weeks. And the best thing here is that we have in store for you some major recommendations that can be huge for runners in terms of value and benefit. But also, we're going to try to filter some of the craziness around these types of things to address a recommendation that is not just, here's something interesting and you should try it, but also what aligns best with the thing that will develop us most as athletes, and how can we think about that. So we'll bring our recommendations, but I would love to hear your questions and comments as well on the topic, because I know that many of you are familiar with some of these things. You've used some, you've tried or tested, or are using many of them, and probably far more than just by ourselves we have. And so we'd love to hear your experiences, share some of them. We'll plug and feature some of those if you do want to share them on air to get a little bit more sense of the picture, a clearer sense of what is a very big picture. All right. So next up, we're going to talk to some people in the field. First up is going to be Meredith. You can anticipate that next week. It's going to be loads of fun. But before we get to anything more with that topic, let's get on to the world of running. All right, let's start with some updates from our crew. The A to Z running folks are doing great things, as we like to share. And we had a spate of some races here this past weekend. Share a few of those now. Justin ran the Grand Rapids Marathon, and very strong effort. Nice work, Justin. And then at the same event in the half marathon, a number of others ran. Notably, Vegas and Alyssa both ran personal best times for the half marathon. Well done. Fairly substantial stuff, too, not just chipping seconds or something. Not that there's anything wrong with chipping seconds in a personal best. It's a personal best all the same. But we also had a number of you all were pacing, which is exciting to be out supporting the racing world, the running world in that way. So Andrew, Dano, Laura, thanks for the pacing efforts. Much appreciated. Also, Craig ran the Des Moines Marathon in what amounts to his first negative split marathon, as we've been seeking a strategy to try to attain that. It's more kind of like a test experience, not a holy grail of this is how he's, the only way to race. But what would it take? Well, he achieved that there in Des Moines. Nice work, Craig. Laura, different Laura, ran the 4-mile race at the Queen Bee half marathon event. 4 miles is just such an interesting distance. I love it. So nice work there, Laura. Mallory ran the Detroit Marathon, and Doug ran the Detroit Half Marathon in his debut. So congrats on the half marathon debut, Doug. All right, moving on to the world more broadly. I teased this in the introduction, and I imagine the whole entire time you've been wondering, what is Zach going to say? What is going on? Des Linden is getting a new heart. As reported by Runner's World in this instance, the new heart is true, but it is virtual. there's the tease. Some of you actually probably already knew this. You probably saw the news. Yes, I baited you a little bit. I'm not clickbaiting because we didn't put it in the title, but I baited you. It's not that Des Linden's like having some major kind of issue and needs a heart replacement or something. She's getting a virtual heart. This is actually really fascinating and ties closely with our conversation about biosensors that we are currently in the midst of. So here's how it goes. There's a company out there, some company, TCS, which is like the sponsor of a bunch of the big races, New York Marathon and stuff. So they are creating a virtual replica of her heart in order to analyze the stress that it undergoes as she's like training and stuff. So it's kind of like a test experience. Can we gain valuable insight by a virtual heart kind of dynamic? And so like literally they've got like this thing that represents her heart that is exactly what her heart is, shaped side, like they're doing MRIs and stuff to get all the details. And then as she undergoes something connected to sensors and other things to detect various kinds of stuff, then they channel those data into this virtual heart, essentially a simulated heart, and figure out what's happening to it. So that they say it's a more direct, but it's actually like an indirect direct way. Because it's not her real heart they're monitoring. Well, they kind of are. But, okay, so this is interesting to me. This is fascinating. First, because why does the virtual heart piece in the puzzle do anything valuable? If you have all the data from her real heart, I guess I don't know. I clearly here, I do not fully understand what they're trying to do and why. And the article doesn't give me much more than what I've shared with you. So I guess what it's supposed to do in this sense is give them like a kind of replica, like AI interacted experience. Like this is what's going to happen to the heart when you do these things. And so they collect enough data, then they can generate predictive elements is the thought. I mean, sure, they certainly could. How accurate is it, or whether that's actionable, if it's, prediction that may or may not in fact be true when it happens. This is tricky to me. Okay, and here's why this is so tricky, right? We understand large language models for AI-generated chatbots, right? Large language models mean if you give it enough information, then it can communicate intelligently about anything, essentially, right? It can know anything by compiling enough information. So the theory here is that if you give a system enough data about Des Linden's physiological and biomechanical functionality, that it's going to essentially know what will happen as she's undergoing stressors to her system. The part where I venture to question that reality is, are the collections of potential that contribute to a given moment in a human experience are substantially more than the collections of information and knowledge that contribute to a response to a question. And even then, we know the chatbots and the large language models literally just sometimes lie. Like they just make stuff up knowingly, because you can actually ask it, hey, did you just make that up? And it'd be like, oh yeah, I didn't find that anywhere. Like, give me your source. Oh, I don't have a source. I made it up. Like they'll do that. So in this scenario, if you have a heart predictive thing that predicts something that isn't true, and then you make choices, like this is far more consequential than trying to submit an essay to my professor that happens to have made up historical events, right? Like this is big stuff. And I, being the perpetual cynic, I don't know. I'm a little unsure, but I'd love to find out more. And so I'm going to be following this one as it ties so closely with our biosensor series, but there won't be a lot of major developments in the near future. It's something that's going to take a bit. I think they said like November's the next time when they expect to have something progress-wise, but I don't know what that means. So we're going to find out more. We're going to bring it to you when we do, but all you need to know right now is Des Linden is getting a new heart. All right, number 2, breathing matters, and apparently we can do it better. Once again, according to Runner's World, I must have gotten a little stuck on Runner's World. We don't often share articles here, but when there's not a ton happening in the racing scene globally, sometimes we end up with spending some time on some other interesting articles. This happens to be the kind of thing that we usually would share as our featured topic in something helpful segment, but it was news insofar as it was recently reported on Runner's World, and I found it helpful enough and timely, so let's share it here. Okay, we all know that breathing matters. The point of the article is that we might not be doing it best. And okay, anytime you see something like that, you think, all right, well, tell me what you think, and I'll decide whether or not I'm going to take that. But this is valuable stuff. So take for instance, famous basketball coach John Wooden. We shared his comments recently when we were talking about the neuromuscular stuff. Specifically, he was the coach who basically started his athletes. We're talking about college basketball. So these athletes have played basketball for years already. And the first thing he would do when he'd start the season is teach them how to put on their socks and shoes. Yep. And why would he do that? Because we need to stop assuming that people know how to do things properly. And that is exactly correct. Never assume that just because someone's been doing a thing even for years that they know how to do it properly. And that apply that to ourselves, because we're not trying to patronize the people around us and think, I need to show you how to tie your shoes. 65-year-old runner who's been doing this for years. No. That's not how we do it. Well, theoretically we could, though. But we don't do it in a patronizing way. It's not because you're doing things wrong. It's because we start with the assumption that it's good for us all to know how to do all the basics. So, okay. Here's the basics in this sense. Breathing. All right. Now, if you are vocally trained or musically trained in any capacity, chances are you know all about this topic because, as you might guess, breathing can be done better and worse. And it has everything to do with the physical interaction with how we take and exit breaths. So, anyone have a guess? Make the prediction. What is this article going to say that we should be doing to breathe properly? How should we be doing that? And you guessed it. We need to be breathing with our diaphragm, that muscle that basically controls our lungs. We need to use that more. Okay, this is the idea. Breathing with your diaphragm is like your belly. Belly breathing, essentially, is how many people call it. And so when you inhale, your belly goes in or out, and then when you exhale, your belly goes in. And so, you move there. Now, you're doing it wrong. You're breathing wrong, apparently, if your shoulders move at all. Okay, check this out. Watch me. Those of you who are watching me, watch me take a deep breath. And watch me exhale that deep breath. Yeah, my shoulders didn't move at all because I breathed with my diaphragm. Okay, now that was terrible. And those of you listening were like, why did he just do that? Well, I did it largely because I was just trying to think about, while I was doing it, what those things are that we're talking about here. Okay, so if you've been trained, this is why I say if you've been trained in music, or vocal or instrumental or otherwise, chances are the people, your conductors, directors, people taught you this right away, because it is impossible to be excellent in things that require exhaling large amounts of breath if you can't do this properly. So here's the difference. Breathing with your diaphragm instead of with, you call it primary and, I might be wrong in saying secondary, but I think that's what it is. Primary and secondary breathing muscles, right? Your primary breathing muscles are your diaphragm and those little muscles around your ribs that help them expand, okay? Those are the primary ones because functionally they do all the important work to make you breathe. Secondary breathing muscles are things like your shoulders and your neck and your back, which, move around when you're like hyperventilating and stuff. But those things should not move when you're taking breaths in a most efficient and effective manner. Instead, it's all happening in the belly. So you can practice this. And this is the point. We should all be better at breathing correctly so that we are more efficient with our air. It is good to breathe better. Yes, you agree? Let's do it. Okay, here's an example. They call it the bellow breath. This came right from the article. This one, you would want to sit down, take a deep breath through your mouth, thinking only about expanding your belly. So you're literally just pushing your belly out. And then while you're sitting there, you breathe hard out. So deep breath in, hard out, squeezing your belly. Like a squeeze the belly. And all the while, nothing moves except for your belly. Okay, so then you do this for 15 seconds, like deep breath in, hard breath out, deep breath in, hard breath out. You're likely to nearly pass out as you're doing this, so be careful. Don't make yourself pass out. Don't hyperventilate either. So and do that, they say, for 15 seconds at a time, then take a break, then do it again for 15 seconds, take a break. And then over time, because remember, we're talking about muscles. You're literally making muscles stronger right now. So what's the principle, right? Consistently and build slowly over time. So do that regularly. I would do it every day, if not more than once a day. Do it regularly, and then add a little more. And they say go up to like maybe maximum of 45 seconds at a time. Again, you're likely to pass out if you do this for too long. So I like that. Okay, there's one. They have a bunch of others in the article. I've linked to the article if you want to see it. It's at Runner's World, something about breathing, probably behind a paywall. So sorry, we don't have a Runner's World subscription either. And so, it's a little bit tedious when you hit those paywalls, but that's why I'm giving it to you here. And so the whole principle of it here is that you can rehearse the muscle movements, and in the same manner that we train anything muscularly, we can apply those principles. So you can do it like slowly, take long, deep breaths in, long, deep breaths out, and then you should also do it sharp and fast, because that's more like what's going to happen when you're running, where you're going, and all of it, only move your belly. Don't move your shoulders and your back. And if you think about it and you stay focused on it, it's actually be really fun to do with another person while you're looking at each other, because you probably just end up laughing. So maybe don't do that. But a mirror might be a good idea, so you can actually see whether you're moving. All right, there you go. That is practical tip, right? Thank you, Runner's World. Appreciate it. Number 3, NCAA cross country is in its final throes, and we haven't really hardly talked about it at all. And I kind of feel badly because I love cross country, but I know it's kind of like the less desirable ostracized sibling of the bunch as far as running goes. Well, lots been going on though, and it's been really interesting and exciting. And so I want to share with you an update at this moment as we're getting ready for championship season, because we will be sharing more soon as well. So, as reported on Let's Run, the Nutty Comb Invitational was this past weekend, and that one is one of the big bellwether meets for NCAA cross country. It has become, especially in the last decade, has become one of those meets that's like all the who's like to compete there, and so it's kind of representative of what you might predict for the national championship as well, which is always exciting. It also happened to be that while it was happening, I was sitting at brunch with the women contingent of the Under Armour Mission Run Baltimore Distance team, which was really fun because they were all interested in the meet. And as you all know, I'm very interested in everything that has to do with running. So we were kind of like at the restaurant watching a little bit of it and looking at the results and talking about it. It was loads of fun. Okay, so that was cool. And it just reminded me that it's just so much fun to hang out with people who like running and talk about running. All right. Nutty Comb was interesting. First, the men's and women's races were both won by Northern Arizona University, which is the first time a school has ever won both in the whole history of the meet. That's amazing. That is really incredibly something, especially because it came with an upset. Certainly on the men's side, NAU was the favorite to win the race. But on the women's side, NC State is the 2-time NCAA team champion in cross country, and slated to have a third this year. They're the favorite to win NCAA cross country, and yet NAU didn't just upset them. They beat them by 40 points, which is big. Now, in NC State's defense, they were missing at least 2 of their key contributors to their team scoring who were not participating. And so there's a big question about, if they were there, would it have been the same or different? Certainly would have been different. How much different? Would they have then won the race? Well, we don't know because it wasn't happening. But at NCAA championships, there's a good chance they will be there. Hopefully they're healthy in time. That includes Sam Bush, who was, what was she in NCAAs last year? Like top 20. And so when you have an individual finisher that's that high up, who's not in the race at all, that does make a difference. All right, well, that's the team result. But on the individual side of things, it was also interesting. Parker Valby of Florida putting the hurt on XC defending champion Caitlin Toohey. And I got to say, when Valby is like looking like this, she is brutal. She is tough to beat. When Caitlin Toohey, we already know Caitlin Toohey is one of the best ever in the NCAA. One of the best collegiate runners in the history of time. Parker Valby is too. And so we have to think about that when the two of these women race, because it's so often the case that people talk about Toohey like Toohey's like this legend of NCAA of college running. Valby is as well, and we should remember that because she does things like this. She beat her by like 12 seconds or something, and that's not easy to do. But Parker Valby can do it. So that's a big question. What does this mean for NCAA championships? Is Caitlin Toohey worried about it? It's still early. We've got a month, but it certainly seeded some doubt for some people. Also, Parker Valby broke the course record en route to that victory, which is saying something because the best of the best cross-country runners have run that course in the last 15 years. So there you go. Now, on the men's side, NAU men dominated, which was, again, predictable from the team standpoint. But on the individual side, they had some really strong showings. But it was Harvard's Graham Blanks who showed up big to take the individual win, taking the individual win over stars like Nico Young of NAU and Kai Robinson of Standard. Recall that Kai Robinson won in outdoor track, both the 5,000 and 10,000, which was a major double win. That is incredible. And Graham Blanks just beat them both among everyone else in the field. So that's huge. Now, this race was interesting on the men's side. And on the women's side, Parker Valby put the hurt on early and just broke everyone and just ran away with it, which strung the whole race out behind. Caitlin Toohey was second and like 20 seconds ahead of the next person, which was her teammate, by the way, Kelsey Schmiel. But in this case, in the men's side, it was an entirely different race. In fact, the whole lead pack was still together in the last mile. And this is an 8K, so 5-mile race. And they didn't really truly break apart until about 400 to go. So that's a different kind of cross country for sure. Now, that being the case, you can certainly remember Graham Blank's name as it comes to the NCAA championships. He's one to watch. Nico, certainly Kai Robinson, these guys. But then on the Young side of things, there's been some interesting, not the family of the Youngs, which is kind of funny because they're also part of the conversation, but younger athletes. There's been tons of talk about this super class of freshmen for the boys and the girls, the men and the women. But on the men's side in particular, to note here in this race, one of the Young twins was there. I can't remember if it was Lex or Leo. I always forget which one, and I didn't write it. Okay, so one of them ran. They both are run at Stanford. But one of them ran in the race. Didn't do great. It was like 86th place or something. But Rocky Hansen, who is a true freshman this year, running for Wake Forest, Rocky Hansen has been killing it. Like on par with one of the greatest seasons a true freshman has ever had in NCAA cross country, and may in fact be one to take that mantle potentially, or maybe not take it, but he rivals it. He just finished 6th place at Nuttycombe, right? 6th place at Nuttycombe basically tells you he's got a chance at like top 10 at nationals cross country. As a true freshman, that's big stuff. Incredible things. So whatever is going on there, Wake Forest and Rocky Hansen, it's good stuff. Going to continue to dominate. All right, I got a bonus one for you here. So we usually only share 3, but this I just got to mention. There's an Olympic trials qualifying event. Not that any event that's sanctioned can be, but this one in particular is contrived to be just that. And it's the McCurdy Micro Marathon held in New York. And this is only the second year. They did it last year. I think it was last year. They did it one other time. And this being the second year, it was very successful. So as I mentioned, this race is intended to be only one thing: get people to qualify for the Olympic trials, the United States Olympic trials standards. So on the men's side, that's 218. On the women's side, that's 237. So they have pacers, like, just chunks of pacers for the time, which, there's one time that they're all trying to run. So it's, kind of like you get a group of pacers and you've got it pretty solid, right? So there's that. But also, it's a very limited field size because they're all trying to run the same time. So they're basically going to be in a pack together. So you want to limit the field size. Strict qualification considerations. and strict limitations on field size, as mentioned. And then the course itself, what they do is they do a 3-mile loop and just do that for an entire marathon. And why do they do a 3-mile loop? Because that's where they're going to then be able to provide aid to the runners at substantially regular intervals. Also, the level of like spectating is way simpler. Not that they had this like massive crowds out there, but your people who are there to support and cheer like see you a ton and can give lots of encouragement, lots of energy in terms of regular interaction. So that's good. All of that is good for marathoning. I mentioned the small field size. It's pancake flat. The course, I think they said like it was delta 8 feet for the full 3-mile loop. 8 feet. So no hardly any change in elevation at all. That's all to say. And then they even had this like literal distance thing. Like they have the line, and if you run the line, you run exactly 26.2 miles. So like to the foot. That's so I don't know if that's exactly true, but you're not going to be able to run the line perfectly because there's other people there. But you get close to it, and you know you're not doing any extra running. That's kind of the point. And then the final thing to note here is they have this really interesting prize structure where they have a prize pool. Here's the money. It's $10,000. And it goes to everyone who hits the qualification standard. So it's just split evenly between all the people who run the time, which is fascinating. Also interesting because it disincentivizes, like you want to do it, but you don't want too many other people to do it, which is kind of funny. But I don't think anyone's actually thinking that in the race. They're not like trying to harm each other's chances. So how did they do? That's the big question. It was a big success. Big time, especially on the men's side. So of a field of, I don't know how many were in the field, but like 50, 35 men ran the U.S. Olympic trials qualifying time. Not all of them, by the way, were American, but they all ran that time. 35 men ran that time. That's crazy. That is such a deep field for that range of competitiveness. Just insane. Tons and tons of people. On the women's side, 13 did it, which is still great. That not obviously as deep, but still an impressive feat in a single race. And so for a race event to be able to claim, we've got 48 people who qualified for the Olympic trials with the U.S. standard time in this one race. Again, they're not all Americans. They're not all actually running in the U.S. trials. But so that's huge. That's really cool. And it's not terribly surprising that you can do things like this, because what you're doing is you're saying people who are ready to do this, who are able to do this, we're going to bring them from all over the place. So it's not like a local or regional thing. But then also, we're going to create the most optimal conditions possible for a group of people to run fast. And when you do that, you get people running fast. So nice work with that one. I imagine that was tons of fun. That would be kind of a cool thing to do sometime. Not that I would necessarily be allowed to do it or able to do it, but for those who are doing it, it sounded like fun. All right. Well, that's it. That's all the stuff that we're going to address today. There's always more we could talk about, but the fact remains we're going to get to more of it because we've got a series coming at you, Biosensors, an interview with CEO of Nix Biosensors, Meredith Cass, coming up next, and many other interesting things in the docket. Most importantly of all of it, though, we need to answer your questions because that's what we love to do around here at AtoZrunning. So submit a question at atozrunning.com/question or jump on any of the social medias. We're on Instagram, YouTube, Spotify, and all the places where you interact with the stuff. Thanks again for listening, and we will talk to you next week.